So welcome. Thanks to everyone for joining us for our fourth Connect and Share session. So I'm Erica Carlisle. I chair the Ethics Committee. And this is a session that's put on by a joint effort between the Ethics Committee and the Wellness Committee, where we're really working to think about some of the moral distress that we experience as pediatric surgeons. So we're excited that you're here tonight to join us. I just would like to introduce a couple of people. So Mindy Statter will be moderating the session, and Ronnie Sullins and Christy Ryland will be helping to facilitate things and to moderate the chat. So we'll look forward to a great presentation here. I'm excited to have Jared Howe, who is one of the pediatric surgeons from El Paso, Texas, who will be joining us to share the case. But before we do that, I'll segue over to Ronnie to go ahead and lay down some ground rules for discussion.
Thanks, Erica. So just going through a couple of the rules for those of you who haven't been here before. If you're going to talk, you can raise your hand using Zoom, or you can feel free to enter comments in the chat anytime. If you want to do an anonymous comment, you can also write to either Christy or I direct chat, and then please just avoid any HIPAA violations or protected information such as hospital information or any identifying information. The most important thing really is being respectful and not interrupting, and then really to reflect on the experience and share the emotion and what you were feeling. So it's not so much about fixing the situation, but more to kind of reflect on what was kind of going on inside. If you can, please keep your videos on and stay present. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Ronnie. So we wanted to kick off the session with replaying one of the videos that Lisa helped us make to define moral distress and just sort of set the tone for what it is that we'll be discussing here today. So I think that Jen is gonna play that for us. So we'll start there.
I played this moments ago and now it seems to not want to be playing. Give me 1 second.
I had the same trouble last time, so I think we have Lisa on backup.
I did find it. Just now I need to share the right screen.
What is moral distress? Moral distress is the result of the perceived violation of one's core values with the feelings of being limited from taking an ethically appropriate action. It often occurs when you know the ethically appropriate action to take, but are prevented to do so due to external restraints. For example, the ethical tension experienced when advocating in the best interests of a baby, but faced with the request for non-beneficial treatment. Moral distress is characterized by feelings of frustration, anger, anxiety, guilt, compromised integrity, powerlessness, and psychologic disequilibrium. So why should we address moral distress? Moral distress must be recognized and acknowledged so that we can understand where these feelings originate. Moral distress can be mitigated when we have an opportunity to openly discuss our experiences and feelings. Third, moral distress has the potential to negatively impact work performance, retention, recruitment, job satisfaction, and the quality of patient care. Stress, when unaddressed, can result in moral residue and injury and can generate worse psychological outcomes such as depression and burnout. We are addressing moral distress because there is a need. Barriers to educate and intervention about moral injury are unfortunately ingrained in our surgical culture. There is the stigma and shame associated with moral distress and the surgical hierarchy. In this hierarchy, senior surgeons may be seen as impervious to moral injury, inhibiting other faculty members or trainees from sharing their feelings or emotional reactions or seeking help. By creating a safe zone, we generate a moral community, a group united by a shared common goal with moral implications, the well-being of our patients. The relationships within this moral community allow for vulnerability, for questioning and tolerance, for expressing uncertainty. Moral distress can be mitigated by convening as a group and creating a safe zone to share and validate feelings. These gatherings provide the opportunity to equip participants with the vocabulary to deconstruct the case, identify the ethical principles and core values that were challenged or violated, to share coping strategies, and identify practical takeaways to diffuse conflicts in the future. I'd like to take a moment to provide a framework for the Connect and Share gatherings. The facilitator should outline the framework for the session. 1. Begin the session and set expectations. No HIPAA violations. Introduce the moderator, the person moderating the chat. Raise hands for discussion or participate through the chat, please. 2. Brief case presentation. Don't get mired down in the clinical details. 3. Reflect on the experience. 4. Share emotions. And 5. Takeaways, practical tips, communication tools, and templates to frame and conduct patient discussions. Connect and Share gatherings provide the tools for moral resilience, which can be fostered with compassion, self-compassion, and an environment that allows for raising ethical concerns. Negative feelings can be rechanneled into opportunities for learning and growth. We'd like to take this opportunity to invite you to gather and share. Join us as we conduct our own Connect and Share session. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for playing that. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to Jared Howe, who I mentioned is a pediatric surgeon who works on the border in El Paso and has been there since about 2006, minus a couple of years there to do Pete's Fellowship in St. Louis. So Jared, welcome. We're excited to hear the case you have to share.
Good evening, and thank you. This is my first time presenting in front of a group, especially on Zoom. It's probably not my strength, but I'll give it a shot. Okay, so basically the case that I have is a 16-year-old female who had a history of vaginal clear cell cancer that underwent a very good resection in Juarez, Mexico, which is our sister city. It's literally right across the Rio Grande. For those people who are not from here, you wouldn't know where one city begins and the other one ends. Prior to 2008, there was not the wall, and so you really didn't know where the border was. She did receive postoperative adjuvant radiation, which was pretty appropriate, but across the way, they do tend to use a broad field and a pretty aggressive radiation scheme. We see that pretty frequently, and as a result, she developed several strictures. She ultimately went to an exploratory laparotomy again in Juarez, and they tried to take down a bunch of the strictures. And unfortunately, that didn't work, and so she had leak intra-atmospheric fistulas, and she was told, or her parents were told, there was nothing more that they could do. So her mother loaded her up into a car and brought her to the International Bridge downtown, and did what we call a bridge transfer. And so the U.S. ambulance will pick up a sick kid and then bring them to the hospital. And that's in fact what happened. And, of course I was called, and I gave the family options. Well, I can go in there and try to do something. I'm not sure what I was going to do. Or we could let her pass. And both were reasonable options, but mom wanted me to do something. So I did. And went and took her to the operating room, diverted her to plenty of laparotomies on her, and ended up buying her another 4 years. Okay. They were hard years for her and everybody else. The meantime, the radiation injury progressed. Her uterus scarred down. She had chronic pain from the stents. She had pretty significant kyphosis from the radiation, which went all the way to her spine. And she was never able to maintain enteral nutrition. So she was TPN dependent. And then that's where the problem starts coming into play. I've got this beautiful child, young lady, who became TPN dependent and could continue living on TPN, but there was no way to get her TPN. And trust me, I tried. Mexico charities, United States charities. Eventually, I got her switched over to the county hospital system when she had 18, and that's how we ended up taking care of it. And we got her out of the hospital off and on. But the issues were is that our hospital was out of money. We were actually going through bankruptcy at the time, our children's hospital. And here on the border, there isn't another option. We're 300 miles away from anything else. We're on our own little island in the desert. And so if the hospital closes, the children suffer. It's not like they can travel an hour down the road. It's just not really a possibility. So, we were tasked with, trying to figure out a way to continue to get this child care when the hospital was trying to push us to get her out because it was costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, ultimately millions of dollars before it was all said and done. None of it was reimbursable. And so that's some of the challenges that we face on a regular border down here on a daily basis. And of course, with the migrant crisis coming through, it's become even more apparent. We're taking care of more and more people that have no ability to pay. There's no way to recoup those costs, and the pool that we have to to get funds from and write those costs off is very limited, and so makes it kind of challenging down here. And that's my case. I have hundreds of cases like that, but that's probably one of the more memorable ones.
Thank you, Jared, for sharing this case. Before I ask you to share your feelings and reflect on this, I just wanted to review a little bit of the terminology. A foreign national is a person without U.S. citizenship or nationality. An undocumented immigrant is a person not a citizen or a national of the United States, but resides in the United States. And in our prep for this session, Deborah Leff reminded all of us that there's another term, and that's the unaccompanied immigrant child who is unaccompanied by parents and presents alone and may require a custodian or a guardian. I think also there's the important distinction between the terms migrant and immigrant, since they're used interchangeably, but they're not synonymous. Migration implies movement that's temporary or seasonal or circular, as opposed to immigration that implies unidirectionality and permanence. Data from the 2002 census on rates of uninsured children in the United States, Texas has an 11% rate of uninsured children. Wyoming is 11%, and uninsured American Indian children are 2 times the national rate. In Nevada and Arizona, it's an 8% uninsured rate. And in Massachusetts, only 1.3% of children are uninsured. So thanks again, Jarrett. Your vulnerability provides an opportunity for all of us to identify with you. And your case really defines moral distress, the perceived violation of one's core values, concurrent with the feeling of being constrained from taking the ethically appropriate action. Can you share with us your feelings regarding this case? Your feelings towards the hospital, anything that you would like to share?
Well, I mean, it's always challenging. I understand you got to keep the lights on, right? And so this is a case that I always bring up with the medical students. When we're in the operating room, it's like, look where everything's made. My gloves and my sutures coming from right across the border here in Juarez, Mexico. The drapes are from China. The surgical instruments are from Germany. the TPNs from Israel, the Zosins from India. So I mean, there's a lot of complex issues here, and how we have a sustainable model to continue to deliver care. And so it's tough, because I always ask the students, what do you do? And they're like, well, take care of the patient. Well, what happens when the money runs out? Because eventually it'll run out. And so that's one thing that gets challenging. And I don't really always have an answer for that, especially as a clinician. I got to take care of the kids and kind of press on. With the hospital, I definitely understood their point. They've got to pay the bills. They've got to pay the nurses. They got to pay the mortgage. They got to pay the electricity. At the same time, I told them that they're going to have to get creative and figure something else out, because locums are also very expensive. And that's kind of where I drew, a line in the sand of like, we can figure this out and work together. Otherwise, you can go pay $7,500 a day for locums to replace me. And so we came to an agreement. We figured out a way and got the county involved to absorb some of those costs for this one patient. But this is one patient, and I encounter this hundreds of times a year. And so I think that's why our situation down here in the border is interesting, because this is just part of our practice. And I think on a national level, we have to come together and make some really tough decisions.
How do you feel? It seems like there's a component of you're shouldering a lot of responsibility, and you're wedged between the care of the patient and the hospital system, and there's a component of powerlessness there, which I think really impacts significantly on the.
Yeah, I think it does. I think I'm actually more frustrated with our national leaders. Kamala Harris came down here for a couple hours, and she looked concerned, uncomfortable. She looked real uncomfortable being down here, and that's what she's been charged with, is fixing some of these issues. I think the folks out in Washington, for the most part, have no clue what we see down here on the border and what we go through as clinicians. And yet they sit in their meetings and they pontificate, and then they create more paperwork for the rest of us to do, and ultimately raise the costs. And so, yeah, I get a little bit pissed off about that, to be quite honest with you. Am I frustrated at the hospital? Not really, because it's a non-for-profit hospital. It's a freestanding children's hospital. We're all working together to do the best we can, and so you have to be realistic. I just put about $3,000 worth of Gore-Tex grafts on a little kid. We did the right thing, and it is what it is, and we go on. So I mean, we do what we can, but I think it goes beyond the local issues of us providing care here on the border. I think it comes together that we as a nation have to have some really tough conversations that go on Twitter feeds and sound bites and pundits on CNN or Fox News, and go on.
Yeah, I think this really highlights on a personal level the distortion of our fiduciary role due to outside forces, and this results in discordance of our values, and that impacts our professional integrity and our moral integrity. And frankly, it's unethical for a physician or a hospital to refuse to provide life-saving care to an uninsured, undocumented child when it would provide care to an uninsured child who's a citizen or a legal resident. And we shouldn't have to make those decisions or be caught in that decision making. Anybody else want to share their feelings about how they regarding this case?
Ilana had a comment in the chat. Do you want to?
Sure. Hi, I'm Eliana Gafar. I was just saying, who decides who lives and who dies? That's one thing. And then the other, as Sherritt was saying, was we have big issues with waste and problems with sustainability of hospitals. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement. I could talk a lot about all my ideas about that, but like, how much money are we wasting that doesn't need to be wasted? And this is one of the main things that, as Mindy said, like, okay, well, we accidentally spent all our money on all these things that could be different, and then we would have more money to provide more care if we had been a little bit more thoughtful in how we, as a healthcare system, provide care. So those are my brief thoughts.
Jarrett, this is Cherry Buckmiller. Thank you so much for sharing the story. I mean, it really shines a lens on things that, you know, some of us are in states, like you said, I'm from Massachusetts, and there's a high level of insured families and children. But even in that situation, we're not allowed to care for every insurance plan. So I think all of us feel some kind of tension depending on our practice environment. And clearly, the example you used is huge, but I'm sure all of us going around the screen can think of situations when we are precluded from taking care of children in our system. So I think it really resonates on so many different levels. I mean, whether or not we get on the phone with the medical director and beg and go through different things, and you had to be very creative in trying to obtain care. And I think it particularly speaks to me because you had a relationship with this young lady, and how many children and patients are not even allowed to come through the door. And I think that that's probably what makes it so heart-wrenching as well, because you wanted to continue that relationship. But I'm sure all of us can think of a time or an example in a place where that just simply isn't allowed because of, you know, economics and finances and contracts and negotiations. And how we respond as individuals is I mean, this is such an important topic.
Well, yeah, thank you. You know, I will say the one thing is I'm probably a little more fortunate than maybe some of you all, is that we're actually able to bring a lot of kids into the hospital, regardless of whatever status they are. Seen a lot of kids from Honduras that have been bad traumas. They show up with diverting ostomies, all sorts of things. You know, if they show up at one of the camps, the Border Patrol will bring them in. We'll just admit them and figure it out and fix them and then send them on their way, so that once they're, you know, wherever they're, once they show up where you guys all live, kind of sets them up for some success, just because we know that it's actually more difficult in some of these more developed and resourced areas to get care, whereas we're just kind of used to kind of working the system. We'll just admit them through the ER, get them tucked in, and then just fix it in a day or two and go on. The tricky thing happens is when they have a complication. Then you've got a problem. But luckily, as we've grown the hospital and we've, you know, we're doing better off financially, we're not getting a lot of pressure because we all live here. We're on the border. It's a binational community. Um, you know, there isn't any place like it until you've lived it. And it's tough to explain it.
You know, one of the things that arises when you have hospitals are faced with financial instability is to what extent can they absorb the expenditures that are associated with providing expensive life-saving care to uninsured, undocumented children without compromising existing clinical programs. It's like there are other aspects of pediatric care that need to be funded as well. And I'm going to raise a question of the group. Should hospitals providing pediatric expertise have formal policies on providing expensive life-saving care to uninsured, undocumented children? And how do we stratify these therapies? Do we value dialysis versus chemotherapy? How, you know, these are really difficult and arbitrary from a monetary aspect, but how do we appropriate funding to different resources for these undocumented children? Thoughts?
Sorry, I can't figure out how to raise my hand.
It's okay.
So let's do it like this. It's a great question. It's a really tricky one. I know that, you know, I'm answering it by just asking a similar one. Through COVID, I don't know if multiple centers did this, but we tried to create policy to talk about who we would treat, who we would not treat through the pandemic. At our institution, I don't know if other institutions did similar things as well. We did that with ethicists, and it was hugely trying. It was very difficult. And so no, Mindy, I didn't answer your question, and I'm not going to stand on a limb and say yes or no, but you know, I think when you're, I guess in a way, when you're dealing with extremely finite resources like we were doing in pandemic response, it is logical to do that, but it is extremely difficult.
Christy, do you want to share any other comments from the chat with the group?
I think Ileana has a bunch of comments. I guess thinking about some I want to talk about any of your thoughts. I mean, I think there's this tension, and I feel some of this. I'm in Houston, so we get some of these kids, maybe not as many as you. And so, I mean, I think first, it's the patient comes. You know, you have to think about what what's going on with the patient and how to care for them. And sometimes they need this long-term follow-up. I know we've had some kids that have swallowed things they shouldn't have and had really bad esophageal strictures, and we can take part, do the first couple stages of their treatment, the aftercare. Then the hospital sometimes has said, oh, the parents can't pay, so we can't do, you know, your next dilation. And so, and I think that's been really tough, but it seems like the hospital should set some expectations about what they're going to do for these kids, because it does feel sometimes like the care is incomplete.
Yeah, I agree with having a process. I'm at the University of Iowa, and we don't see as many undocumented kids, but we do see, a handful. And the hospital overall has a system by which all of those cases are reviewed by a committee. I'm on that as an ethicist, and then we have sort of the CMO and the pharmacist, the sort of multidisciplinary team that reviews all the patients and sort of looks at trying to be standard in how we do that. And ultimately we usually approve everything, but especially Christy, like to your point, once we start a line of treatment, we plan to continue it. And, I don't know how long we can extend that, but so far we're usually able to do it. But I think that knowing that there's a process in place that's not reliant on an individual to make a decision about how to ration their time or to ration their care, it feels useful.
Jared, can arrangements be made for these children once they receive care to go back to Mexico, or is that unrealistic?
Sometimes we're able to do that. Sometimes we're not. Part of the discharge planning, you got to get a little creative, when you send the kids home. But it can be limited. Mexico has different insurance systems, different tiers, different classes. And so sometimes the care is excellent. We can send them to Monterrey or Mexico City. Liver transplants get followed up for their biliary triages, etc. Sometimes we can't. So,
well, I find one issue is that some of these families that are crossing the border to actually move here as undocumented, they're themselves in transit. So then the problem is like, where are they going, and trying to see like how to set them up with maybe some person some area that they're going to go to, like a name for a referral. But that's been also hard when they're sort of in transit between the border and, their next stop. Ileana had a comment about telemedicine services, and that's like a possibility, but I think a lot of the hospital's insurance, like the insurance policies, you can't actually do telemedicine unless they're in state. They can use MyChart to ask you questions if they have that capability, but I think sometimes it's really difficult once they leave the state to maintain any sort of contact.
Other questions would be like, are there themes of what you're seeing are gaps in their knowledge that you could, instead of like, oh, this one patient has this, it's like more globally, we're seeing these trends and there's a knowledge gap to fulfill, reaching higher up to just educate and hopefully decrease the amount of issues that are coming. I don't know, I'm not in your situation, but that's something that comes to mind.
it's not just pediatric surgeons that are faced with this. When you look at the failure to treat children that have chronic diseases that are undocumented immigrants impacts their ability to attend school. So their parents can't work. So it really just impacts the productivity and their contribution to the community. But it's also, you know, if you can't immunize children or contain infectious diseases, it affects public health and economic well-being of entire communities, particularly if it's a disease like TB that could become endemic within a community. Jared, you highlighted that you had to be creative with charitable care here and got her into the adult hospital for care. Are there established charities that you routinely access for the care of these kids? Is there a philanthropy that's set up at your hospital?
There's a foundation that we can access for certain things. Luckily, most of the kids, I mean, like the kids we all treat, you know, you fix them, you get them better, and you go on. You know, you have some of the kids with Hirschsprungs, they'll need chronic irrigations, etc. So it's not been that taxing, if that kind of answers your question. But going back to your previous statement about, you know, kids with TB or people needing vaccines or people needing surgery so their parents are productive and so that they can be productive. Again, on a national level, we have to address this. If we're going to keep allowing all these folks from coming from all over the world to come to this country, if that's going to be the plan, then we have to have a plan on how to make them successful. If we don't want to do that, then we have to have a plan to keep these folks where they're at and make them successful there. Because what we're doing right now is we're setting us all up for failure. Surgically, we can fix a lot of things. We can do the Hirschsprungs and imperfect anuses and all sorts of stuff. But I think that's where we, you know, through our organizations, apps, etc., need to start bringing up some of these hard conversations because it's not working. And that kid that comes over with TB that's not treated, they're going to give it to my kids. That's not cool.
Exactly.
And the people that are coming over that we're treating, if we run out of money, then my own kids don't have the, you know, the option for care. And where I'm living, that's a major issue. There was one day one of my own kids got into intussusception. I was the only pediatric surgeon in town. There was only one radiologist in town who knew how to do it. So if we're both gone, you know, that puts my kids and other kids at risk.
For those like yourself that work in areas like this, is aligning the expectations of you as the pediatric surgeon, the hospital, and then the families that come seeking care, do you feel like that is transparent and done well, or does an element of surprise and frustration play into even more, I think, distress, frankly? I mean, is that an area that we could impact by being at least very transparent about the options?
We're, you know, actually, I will say I'm pretty fortunate because again, where I live, my community, we're so used to dealing with this, we've got a workaround for it. So it's, you know, we make it usually work. I will say the parents that come in seeking care, very grateful from northern Mexico. I will say people coming in from other parts of the world have not been as grateful and have been a little bit more demanding. And that's actually been something new to us and our culture here on the border as El Pasoans and folks from Juarez. That's been actually a little bit more challenging and frustrating, being told what to do by folks as opposed to just providing it. And so that's a new element because you know, the borderland, it's a desert island. There's about 1.5 million people in Juarez, and there's about 800 of us here in El Paso, 800,000. So it's different. So I think things are pretty transparent. Actually, we're able to make it work here.
You know, I'm Jarrett's partner. I'm in El Paso as well. And it's really interesting to see the workarounds. And I started learning all of them when I got here 4 years ago. And to the point that my first patient was, I walk in the ER, they're like, oh, this young lady has acute cholecystitis. I start talking to her. There's a woman with her. And I said, hi, who's this? They're like, oh, it's my aunt. She's my guardian. And they know to say that because the aunt's allowed to cross the border. The child was born in the US, but the parents are not. And so that most families that live on the border have their children here if they do, and they actually have family members that are able to cross and provide care and actually provide, really good family support. And I think that's the thing that makes it a little bit easier when we're doing our workarounds, is that a lot of people do have big extended families that have been in our area for a long time. The real challenge that we see is because the people that are coming across the border, who are not just from northern Mexico, but maybe immigrating from farther away via, other parts of Central America, Haitians that are coming via Brazil. We see all types. And so it's really interesting to try to work in the system when we're used to some of our workarounds when they stop working. And I think that's one of the really tough things to see. I think Jared especially always had really good stories from before the border was really a border, when he was a resident, how they just did things, how people would come into clinic but not be registered. And, they would be giving care for MA's parents and other people that, they provided regularly because there was just a way to do it. And I think we still, really do try to provide as best and as comprehensive care, and I think it's, like you said, it's really, but it's very interesting how our children are acutely aware. Someone brought up families needing to work. I've had 8-year-olds tell me, I can't stay in the hospital one more day. My mom's boss is going to fire them, because many of the jobs our patients' parents work are not protected by things like FMLA. They're paid cash. They're not, they aren't afforded the protections. And it's really heartbreaking to have that conversation with an 8-year-old who is acutely aware of where money comes from. So.
Thanks for sharing that. Aaron had shared a case with us. Aaron, are you on? Okay, Aaron? Okay.
Mindy, do you mind if I make a comment?
Hey, Mindy, I am here.
Certainly.
I'm so sorry. I'm picking up a child, and
who wanted to make a comment? It's okay. 1 second.
Sorry. Yeah.
Who wanted to make a comment?
Oh, it's okay. I didn't want to interrupt, Aaron. I just wanted to make a comment on just the Dr. Howe and his partner as well. Sorry, I didn't get your name.
Sarah Walker.
Dr. Walker. It just strikes me listening to your stories of what you deal with on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I think as pediatric surgeons, we have all just the most incredible jobs. I think we can all agree with that. But I'm listening to this kind of background level of tension that you experience probably on a daily basis, that I'm sitting in a place that I feel very privileged, that I don't take care of my patients and listen to them worrying about their parents having to work. And I take care of my patients, and I don't worry about, not being able to have necessarily all of the resources that I want to be able to look after them, and having to go and apply for grant funding so that I can continue to look after them. And, I'm just wondering how, clearly, Dr. Howe, you've mentioned multiple times that, oh, it's okay, we get by and we've gotten really good at things. And, I'm listening to you, you seem like a MacGyver to me. And it's really just fantastic that you figured out how to game the system, and that you've become very comfortable in your environment, and you've become such a wonderful asset. It's what it seems to be. And yet I just wanted to speak into the truth that, this is a significant level of tension that you seem to be having to deal with on a very real level, and you're advocating for your patients in this glorious way. But our job can be very hard, and made harder because of limited resources, you being one of those limited resources.
That's why we're doing this. I think it's go ahead.
No, I just didn't know if Aaron wanted to comment when you were done, Mindy.
Aaron, did you want to briefly share your case? Because I think this also is a good example of how there needs to be innovation in terms of finding funding to take care of undocumented immigrant children.
Yeah, sure, I can do that. I had a similar situation happen a few years ago. I'm on our ethics committee, and I was in the role of an ethics committee member, although this patient was cared for by the GI liver and surgical services. And it was a family that was from Guatemala and had a baby with biliary atresia. And in Guatemala, they were not culturally going to repair that or offer a Kasai at all. That the accepted way to care for such a baby would be to let nature take its course, in essence, and care for the baby for the amount of time that she would survive with her liver failing. And so they had family in Chicago and flew to Chicago to stay with this family and brought the baby, who was 3 months old and in liver failure. She was floridly jaundiced and with a distended abdomen with ascites. And the baby was clearly not well. She was failing to thrive and not eating. And so they came straight from the airport at O'Hare to our emergency room. And so then the question was, well, what, clearly the right thing to do is admit the baby and offer, care for the baby immediately. But then what about the next steps? And so this was a family who was really planning to come and visit their own extended family. But how do you sort of think through the next steps of, this is not a baby, the window for Kasai has been missed. And so what would be next? It would be offering a liver transplant. And so we had a large discussion about what we could offer and how. The father wanted to offer a living donor, the split liver. And so then again, you'd have a parent who also potentially would need a surgery. So I don't know, Mindy, maybe I should just stop right there. Is that okay? Or do you want me to keep going?
I would keep going and share the outcome of this case because it's quite interesting. And I think it'll be a useful contribution to this group, to this discussion.
Yeah, so we had a lot of discussions about, would we even offer, first of all, would you list the baby for a liver transplant? Because as many people on this call know, the scarcity of livers, especially for a 3-month-old baby, and in thinking about acuity and a family that came that's how do you think about them? Because are they really undocumented? It's not clear. Are they going to stay in the United States long term? Right at the moment that they showed up, they were travelers. They're visiting, and so they haven't passed a window of being just traveling to come and visit family. But presumably they would stay in the United States with family to allow the baby to continue to get care, and then you'd become you'd have to go through a formal documentation process or be undocumented. And so the question is then, how do you provide the medications that the baby might need if you were going to even list and think that the baby could get a deceased donor liver? And the decision making was such that it really seemed like she was likely not going to survive to get a deceased liver. And then there was a willing parent. And so the efforts of everyone to try to provide her care, and looking around Chicago at the multiple transplant programs that we have, through some calls through our GI liver team, we were able to determine that the University of Chicago was reinvigorating their pediatric program and were willing to take this father and baby to do a split liver transplant, a living donor to her, free of charge. And so she was transferred to the University of Chicago. Unfortunately, it's a different institution, so I don't know the long-term outcome of, are they still in Chicago, like what long-term happened. But that is the way this particular case played out.
Thank you for sharing that. I put an article in the chat entitled Successful Pathways to Liver Transplant for Undocumented Immigrants. And it's basically the Mount Sinai experience here in New York. And there's state to state variation in terms of funding for undocumented immigrants care, which I think it's very significant heterogeneity among the states, as highlighted by Jarrett and Sarah. Any comments?
Yeah, this is Erin. I was just going to comment that, kind of going through this case, and I appreciated, I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly who brought up the concept of having like a hospital level panel. It's a really interesting concept to think about, like a multidisciplinary group that might review things. I think I have now been had the experience to be on like a fetal oversight committee that we started within the hospital once we started our fetal intervention program, which has been really useful. And I've learned a lot through it as we've evaluated cases that fall out of like normal fetal surgical criteria. And we're thinking about offering that operation or not. I think similarly, cases like this, or even just complex care, we were talking about trisomy 13 and 18 in our calls earlier, when there's sort of multiple levels of care that get really complex, and offering that, having kind of a review committee is a great way to do it, that takes it away from individual people or individual groups having to kind of string things together, which is, I think, another thing that I was hearing about how the remarkable work that Jared and his team are doing, but it feels like they're stringing it along, and it's just by the luck of that situation, it keeps working out. But it could be something that hospitals do, or it could even be kind of a national recommendation. If you think about it, it really needs to be bigger than any one hospital, but that is a practice that could be disseminated.
I think that's a really important point in terms of having consensus and not allowing one individual to make a decision. And this has been highlighted, and it continues to be a problem. Undocumented immigrant children are no different than children that have intellectual and developmental disabilities in terms of whether they're referred and even listed for transplants. And this stems from social value criteria when you're rationing limited resources, and social worth judgments. They're prone to biases, and they're not morally relevant considerations, and really don't reflect the pluralistic values of our society. And as physicians, we're not trained to assess social value, and we shouldn't violate the trust of our patients in any fiduciary relationship. But the fact that a patient with Down syndrome finally got a heart-lung transplant in the 1990s, and prior to that, they were never referred or even listed. And the fact that you really need a good child life person to engage with children in a developmentally appropriate way to really bring that kid out when they're being assessed by a transplant team and social work for their transplant, to be referred and listed for a transplant. Because if an undocumented immigrant child becomes brain dead, their organs are harvested. And the same thing happens with children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. When they pass away, everyone's clamoring for their organs, so it's the issue of justice as well. So I think that's another area that makes us all uncomfortable, and that why what you're highlighting, Erin, is really important in terms of consensus.
Yeah, it seems like you could also, if you were able to have consensus about such a thing and have recommendations, that as cases come up, they can also be shared then too, more easily between institutions, or even just aggregated data that can be disseminated or published, as you mentioned with the down. Those things are important then going forward as care evolves, in terms of survival of different things, as if you were to extend it to kind of even ever more complex chronic conditions in all children, undocumented or not.
Thank you. Deborah, did you have any, I know you recently attended the American Society of Bioethics and Humanities meeting. Do you have anything to share from your experience and work with? I know you've done some work with this in this area.
Well, I first want to commend Jared and his team for magnificent work. It's really tough. And I want to certainly echo that ultimately, the systems issues need to be addressed, and the root causes of, why people are immigrating, leaving their home to come to the United States for a better life. Also, one other observation is that legislation for example, for child labor laws to provide better oversight and larger penalties for children who have been injured or even suffered mortalities because of their engagement in illegal labor can have some unintended consequences in that, these children come to the United States if they're unaccompanied, and they come to work, and they have to pay for their own room and board. They often have to pay debts for the coyotes that bring them to the United States, and they send money home for their families to help support their families. So on the one hand, preventing illegal child labor is important. On the other hand, it also has side effects for for their families and other repercussions. And so we have to have better ways of getting these kids in school to also provide them better resources so that they may be able to work in jobs that are safer, have fewer hours, and allow them to meet the needs of their families as well. So those are some of the issues that were brought up and discussed.
Thank you. Jared, did you have a comment?
No, I think that's very well said, and certainly much more polished than anything I would say. But basically, what we're allowing is an underclass by one, allowing folks to come here in the first place and not having a pathway for them, and two, by not having a pathway for them, we're creating a permanent underclass. It's discriminatory. It puts them at risk for predation, be it labor, sex trafficking, what have you. And ultimately, that'll increase crime and cause a lot of other problems. And on a bigger spectrum, I think that's why a lot of us, I think, are frustrated, because you just continually set people up for failure. We can fix their ostomies, hernias, what have you, but when we send them home, what are we sending them to, and what opportunities we're giving them? It's very frustrating.
I just want to share with the group, kids shouldn't be punished for the actions of their parents, and the courts have offered exemptions permitting children who are undocumented to participate in and receive greater benefit from societal resources, and this specifically education. And in 1982, there was a landmark case called Plyer versus Doe, where the Supreme Court struck down a Texas statute denying undocumented immigrant children access to public school, finding that the statute violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The court found that the law imposed a discriminatory burden on children based on a legal characteristic, citizenship, for which they had no control. And the court recognized the long-term harms of denying children education, which is a time-sensitive resource, which impacts their development, skills attainment, ability to attain employment, and participation in society. And I think that kind of highlights some of the things that Deborah brought up. Ileana in the chat made a comment, how can we take what we've discussed here and determine the next actionable steps for us as APSA to commit to? I think that's something for Tom Tracy as president-elect. We can present that as a charge to him, and maybe partnering with AAP and other organizations that provide care to children. I think it was the American Society of Bioethics and Humanities, ASBH, that Deborah attended. Correct, Deborah? Thanks. Tom?
Oh, thanks for the challenge, Mindy, and all of your comments are so special, and this is a very special case. And Jarrett, I echo the sentiments of everybody. You and Sarah are in an incredible position and an example for us all. So yeah, as we look forward to APSA down the road, these are going to be important issues that we have to continue to focus on and not shy away from because of all the potential or perceived consequences. So thank you so much.
And Mindy, sorry, I'm driving, just to answer your question. Yes, these kids are entitled to an education, but if they're working all night, for example, in factories, they may be exhausted, they can't stay awake, and they're subjected to often toxins that burn their eyes or burn their skin, and they're not fit to actually get an education because of the side effects of their labor.
Generally, when we have these moral distress rounds, we like to have some pragmatic, concrete takeaways. Anybody have any? I think bringing this up to our organization and any opportunity we have at the state level to advocate for these patients within our own hospital systems, formulating consensus committees. I think this is important not only for undocumented immigrants, but the role for there's a lot of heterogeneity in the management of trisomy 13 and 18 kids, and there needs to be some some consensus in terms of having all stakeholders involved, whether it's cardiac surgery, pediatric surgery, neonatology, OBGYN, everybody involved. Jared and Sarah.
I have a couple of suggestions.
Great.
One is that media and publicizing these issues can be very powerful. So that was certainly highlighted by Hannah Dreyer, whose articles in the New York Times highlighted the child's severe injury and almost amputation of an arm in the poultry factories, really brought this to public eye. There are initiatives now, there are bills in the Senate and the House of Representatives to increase penalties, to create better oversight. The Department of Labor and Health and Human Services now have an initiative to put better means of sort of overseeing child labor issues, to educate employers, to have postings of what's allowed, what isn't allowed, what are unsafe labor practices for children, and so that's all in the works. But unfortunately, there's a big conflict between state and federal laws, at least in terms of labor issues for the kids, which ultimately clearly affects their health and well-being. And there are numerous states now, including Wisconsin and Arkansas and New Hampshire and several others, Ohio, that are trying to change their own labor laws to lower the ages, for example, in which kids can serve alcohol, increase the hours that they can work and the times at night that they can work until. So there are going to be some judicial battlegrounds coming up, I expect, as a result of the discordance between what's going on at the state levels and what the federal government and federal legislators are trying to do to improve situations for child migrants.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone for sharing the comments. I think this has been an awesome discussion and hopefully one that will continue to move forward as we can think of ways to support each other and to work together to provide good care to everyone. Jared, I really, really appreciate you being here to share your story.
Thank you.
As well as all the great work that you and Sarah are doing in El Paso, and Aaron, it was so helpful to hear your story as well. And thanks to Mindy for facilitating and to all for a wonderful discussion. So have a great night.
Thank you.